Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Amazon Web Services webcast in our Build a Future-Ready Business series. Today's topic is continuous assurance. My name is Phil Rodriguez. I'm the security lead for AWS in Australia and New Zealand, and I'm going to introduce a topic before we dive deep into the technology. I really like the summary sentence that we use for today's sessions. Quote, "An organization's ability to successfully adopt cloud at scale is a function of their ability to secure cloud at scale." We find all the time that organizations move the fastest when they align their security mechanisms to their business priorities. In the cloud, this means taking the time to build the right foundation of security controls across the full lifecycle of protect, detect, respond, and recover before you start to migrate workloads. However, the global security industry does not have enough people to properly secure or monitor the amount of applications or data that the world is producing. Our scaling mechanism and the way we are going to keep up with this increased pace of technology is to embrace automation in the heart of everything we do as a security industry. Continuous assurance is powered by security automation, and security automation is powered by the cloud. These next 45 minutes are a specific example of how we work with customers to build continuous assurance at scale. In this case, it was for a large bank, but these tips and techniques work for organizations of all sizes. Okay, let's dive deep into this topic. Over to you, Raisa.
Thank you for that, Phil. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Raisa Hashem, DevOps Security Specialist with AWS Professional Services. And most of last year, I spent working in collaboration with National Australia Bank and Contino, one of our partners, to build a decentralized event-driven continuous assurance platform. So today I'll take you through the, the architecture that's helped drive that, the thinking, so where to get started in terms of the mindset as well as frameworks. And I will go into a brief demo at the end just to show how the technology is working. So let's dive right in. So now probably started the cloud journey almost 5 to 6 years ago. And at the time that they started NAB security were not as engaged. In late 2014, they did an assessment of their cloud security posture in preparation for the deployment of the first APRA-regulated material workload into AWS by any of the tier 1 banks. The thing is that there were lots of reds and yellows. So then again in 2015, NAB security operations were given the opportunity to work out what it would take to go to green. After 2 tries in 2018, so last year, NAB engaged with AWS Professional Services, so myself and my colleague David Kaplan, and they wanted to hit the pedal hard on automating cloud security and get to green. The last year, David West and Ivan Sekulic presented at the Sydney AWS Summit and reInvent and discussed how in the 3rd iterations, after 3 tries, now have started to get it right. So the key takeaway from here is that it does take quite some time. It requires commitment to be able to get onto this journey, to be able to secure at scale. So what are some of the challenges that NAB faced? Well, the objective for the strategy was to remove security as a blocker and to enable all of NAB's developers to be able to scale without having security get in the way. So the thing is, NAB, being a regulated environment, could not adopt cloud at scale if they could not secure cloud at scale. So they had to have a function where security was always a step ahead in terms of automation, in terms of scaling. Security had to be built in and not bolted on. And these were some of their requirements, as well as security had to be transparent. No excuses and no exemptions. At that time, before we got on board, it took NAB about 19 business days, or almost a month, to deploy security controls across their accounts. which was a very long time. And in that process, there was lots of human engagements. So security architects had to talk to security operations. Security operations had to, again, talk to the architects, who will then have to verify requirements from application teams who wanted to deploy applications faster than they could deploy controls. So the engagement was quite poor, and of course it took way too long, and it had a very high dependency and quite a high turnaround time. And then if they decided to use new controls or new services or retrofitting old services, they actually had absolutely no way or no means of doing that. It became very stressful and quite frustrating, because either it was very manual, so they had to go into every single AWS account to be updating controls or deploying new controls, and there was no way to get visibility of which control was deployed where and what version of that control was running in what account. So these were the challenges that NAB faced, and when we started the work last year, we had very simple goals. It had to be fast, it had to be easy, and it had to be cheap. And none of those things could be achieved without automation. So they made very heavy investments in automation and decentralization. And decentralization was one of the key tenets. Everything that we build had to be decoupled and decentralized so that there was no dependencies. And humans don't scale. So to be able to do this at scale, we had to automate wherever possible. And what that resulted to was we were able to reduce the deployment time from 19 days to 45 seconds. This was more than 35,000 times faster than what they have ever been able to achieve before. Developers can provision infrastructure by any method, API, CLI, SDK, console, and security could sleep at night knowing that the right controls will be in place in the right environments, which means that there was no more human intervention, and the updates to security controls could happen either automatically or with the push of a button. So let's get into the foundations of continuous assurance, how this is possible, how this can be achieved, and the thinking or the mindset that we need to have around it. Continuous assurance is the capability to get complete visibility of everything in your cloud environment all of the time. It adds a security lens to this complete visibility so that anything other than the known good is identified near real time so that it can be remediated. And ideally, you also have a level of automation around the remediation. This is incredibly powerful for managing risk, especially in a regulated environment, as you have complete and current view of your risk posture at any time. This is the foundation of continuous assurance. The controls that you see, which are the little tick boxes, are runtime primitives. These are the foundational elements. These are atomic units running in an account. They operate separately as individual entities with isolated runtime behaviors and characteristics. And then if you abstract one layer out, you have the boxes that you can see where the ticks are. It says production baseline product, API gateway product, RDS product. These products are deployment primitives. They're logical grouping of security controls. We don't deploy a collection of controls though, we deploy products. And so we might be thinking, so what's the nature of these products or these logical grouping of controls? Well, a related set of controls meet the security objectives of a particular workload, a particular AWS service, or a group to protect the organization as a whole. And these are actually the only ways that NAB have identified to categorize controls. But we don't actually refer to them as categories, we refer to them as portfolios, which is essentially the bigger boxes that you can see there. And the reason we talk about portfolios is because portfolios address a market. It helps security think like a business. we begin to focus on the services that security provide to their customers, starting from the customer, their internal customers, or external, and working backwards. And like any business, this affects how they evolve and iterate their services to meet the changing needs of their respective customer markets. So at NAB, they identified 3 different addressable markets for security. And that's why you can see 3 portfolios. Firstly, down the bottom of the mountain or the pyramid, you have baseline portfolios, which serves the enterprise market. This protects anyone and everyone using AWS, irrespective of workload or team or service. Any team wanting to use AWS, they receive these foundational controls in all of their environments. The next layer up the mountain, which it gets a little bit more specific, are service-specific portfolios. These portfolios are for teams who are using specific AWS services. So if you're not using API Gateway, you won't get API Gateway controls in your environment. If you're using RDS, EBS, those service-specific controls will be deployed as RDS product or EBS product in your environment. So when I'm saying controls in this case, it can be preventative, corrective, detective in nature. And for our purposes and for NAB's purposes, the detective controls are using AWS config and config rules, which I'll go into in a little bit. Preventative and corrective can have various flavors, and I'll give you an example of those at the end or when I take you through a brief demo. One thing that NAB also did really well when we came on board were the assessments and threat modeling. So they had a very robust process for doing AWS service assessments and application security assessments. They had a threat modeling framework and a risk assessment framework that they would apply, and based off of the results of that would derive controls. Now, as I said, controls can be detective, corrective, or preventive in nature. Alongside those, they also had other types of controls, such as educational ones or governance ones. What they're able to do, though, is once they derive those controls, the ones that were detective or preventative or corrective, they would be able to place those using this framework in each of the products or the associated correct product. So, for example, if they had a service assessment done for API Gateway, all the API Gateway controls will be in the API Gateway product. The thing that they reached after that was once they got to that understanding of, okay, these are my products and this is how I'll categorize them, how is it that it would actually end up in each of the AWS environments? And this is where I would like to introduce you to the security control lifecycle. So the bit in the middle is the assessment work that they've done and putting it into the products and portfolio framework. And then after that, there is actually a whole end-to-end lifecycle that we found for any type of control, detective, preventive, or corrective, that follow an iterative lifecycle process. So for a control, say if we choose a config rule detective control, once the assessment or threat modeling is done, and we've identified that it'll go into an API Gateway product, there is a detailed design space that the control will go to, where the security architects and security operations will analyze the control further and create a detailed design so that it can be translated to code. Then there is a development process, which is test-driven security development of how to create that control as code. Then it goes to a deployment and delivery process and deploying at scale. After that, you're able to get reports and analyze the results and see where you're compliant and non-compliant. You have the opportunity to respond once you are aware and see which controls are compliant and not compliant. The education piece actually goes hand in hand across all of those different pillars, because only through education will application teams or your customers who are using your security products know how that those controls will behave in their environment and how they should behave in turn to ensure that you are compliant always. For this talk today, I'm going to dive into the right side, so design, develop, and deploy and deliver. I'm going to predominantly focus on deployment and delivery. In terms of designing and developing, it's very important that we do behavior-driven specifications, because what that gives you are specific use cases and how the control is to behave as per that specific use case. Breaking it down into a behavior-driven specification allows you to derive tests off of it, which then promotes test-driven security development. I did a talk last year. There is a webinar called Easily Transform Compliance to Code using AWS config rules and the rules development kit. Please check it out. It's out there on SlideShare as well as the webinar recording. It actually takes you through in detail, line by line, how you can start to do a detailed design of a control. And then from then, how you can go about producing tests as well as writing the control as code. So I won't focus it much more on the design and develop side. What I'll start to talk further about is the deployment and delivery. So we at NAB and us together developed 3 delivery mechanisms. And at present, NAB have these controls deployed and delivered across 300 plus accounts in their environment, in non-production as well as production. So what are the different delivery mechanisms? Well, if you remember earlier, NAB were able to categorize the controls that they will derive from their assessments into products and portfolios. And then they kind of got stuck as to how that would end up in the AWS environment. So they realized there are actually each of the baseline service and application portfolios had specific delivery mechanisms with specific AWS technologies that enabled NAB to do this at scale. So we have for baseline assurance portfolio proactive delivery using AWS stack sets. I'll go into all of these in a lot more detail very soon. Reactive delivery, so almost near real time using CloudWatch events and Event Bus, as well as retroactive delivery. So a full-fledged secure CI/CD pipeline that they would use to deploy very specific use cases into AWS accounts or do multi-account deployments. So I'll go into a lot more detail starting with the proactive delivery. So proactive delivery is the mechanism of using a distributed landing zone architecture. In proactive delivery, you get baseline controls across all of your AWS environments before an application team can start to consume or use that account. So say that you have a new AWS account request that goes onto your platform team or CloudOps team, and they go through an account provisioning process. You don't really care what that account provisioning process is, but what you care about is how can multiple teams not have to talk to each other or be dependent on each other, or one team have to say, hey, I'm done with my part, tap someone else on the shoulder and get them to do their part on the account provisioning process. How can you get all the humans out of that and ensure that whole provisioning process is automated? So this is where the decentralized mechanism comes in. As soon as an account is provisioned, that automatically publishes to an SNS topic. And this SNS topic essentially is the trigger for X number of other teams to do their deployments. And this is all automated, so no one is waiting for the SNS topic to come along. Essentially, as soon as CloudOps publishes to an SNS topic, this triggers deployments in the security operations, or if you have sort of patterns and blueprint architectures that need to be present before an account goes out to an application team, all of these to nth number of deployments can happen in this account. So if we're taking into consideration the security side of it, from the SecOps team, you using CloudFormation stack sets are able to deploy a bunch of config rules or detective controls in the new account, making this account a new armored account that applications teams can start to consume. So before application teams even get into using that account, they already have all of the detective controls in place, as well as remediative or corrective controls if you have them specified, as well as potentially some patterns that they can get started with. And all of a sudden, all of the dependencies have been taken out in terms of teams chasing one another, and all of this is automated using a fully decentralized mechanism, which is enabled by that SNS topic. The teams also then provide feedback back to the CloudOps account that, hey, all my provisioning is done. This can now be handed over to an application team. So that was proactive delivery mechanism. I'll now go into talking about the reactive delivery mechanism, which, if you remember, the pyramid was to ensure that AWS services that you're using, though controls specific to that AWS service, are available in your account. So now I am a service team or an application team. I have received my new application account. It's a fully armored account. It has my baseline portfolio of config rules in place. So the detection can start straight off the bat from day dot that I start using that account. So I create a new service. So say, for example, I'm wanting to create a Lambda function, so I create an IAM role for my Lambda function. What this does essentially triggers CloudWatch events and event bus, which you've already got CloudFormation stack sets with all of the controls in a security operations account, and it'll apply the controls specific to IAM and IAM roles, as well as preventative controls for any mandatory policies that a role must have in your new account. So this is on-demand delivery of controls contextually delivered in your accounts. This can also be applied to, or what NAB also have running in their environment, is as soon as you get a new account and there's nothing running in it, say an application team creates an S3 bucket, or they create an EC2 instance, all of the EC2 or S3 related controls are delivered on demand into the new application account. This helps you with operational awareness and insights. So you know what the security posture of an account is and the fact that it's aligned to the resources that are provisioned in the account. It also helps avoid control proliferation, especially if you have heaps of controls in your environment and there's not necessarily a one-to-one use of them. And of course, it's also a mechanism for cost optimization. So that was reactive delivery. I'll jump into retroactive delivery briefly. So retroactive delivery is something that you may already be quite aware of and use in your environment. So this is using a continuous deployment and delivery pipeline. What we've done and what NAB's done using the retroactive delivery is two things. So one, ability to be able to deploy controls in a secure security operations account which essentially is isolated from anywhere else and operable only by security operations. I'll go into that very soon. So using a CI/CD pipeline, they deploy into the security operations account, which houses all of the code for the controls, so making it housed in a tamper-proof environment. They also use CI/CD pipelines to deploy controls in specific application accounts, controls that are not required in all of the accounts, but have very specific application usages, say internet banking specific controls, for example. So how does it work? Well, you have the SecOps team who have committed their compliances code, say that they're writing for S3 product, for example. So a new S3 control, they'll commit to the overall S3 product repository. Upon commit, there's a bunch of testing that happens on the latest commit. So static code analysis as well as unit testing of the compliances code. And once the tests are passed, it deploys the CloudFormation stack sets in the security operations account. So CloudFormation stack sets essentially is the mechanism to do deployments at scale across hundreds of accounts or thousands. And using the CI/CD pipeline, the security operations team is able to deploy tested compliances code into the parent CloudFormation stack set. And this is obviously an iterative process. So this enables the security operations team to do continuous updates and continuous changes and modifications into their security operations account. Now, how does this work in a multi-account setup? So I'll just take you through a little bit of the multi-account architecture. And essentially, as I was referring to earlier, security operations have a publisher account. This account houses all of the code or the Lambda functions for the AWS config rules. And it also houses the stack sets, which holds the CloudFormation template or the parent CloudFormation template for each of the rules. So the way to think about it is the CloudFormation stack sets are the infrastructure as code components, and the Lambda functions are your compliances code logic. So if you write it in Python or you write it in Node.js, whatever language you're comfortable with, so those are the Lambda function components. And anytime there's a new application account, the stack set or the automation in place creates a child stack based on the parent stack set template in each of the application accounts. So what it deploys is essentially the shell of a config rule. By shell, I mean the rule that says whether you're compliant or non-compliant. However, know that the logic for the rule is actually still in the security operations publisher account, and hence shell. So this is what NAB has set up in their environment at the moment to enable multi-account deployments at scale. This is actually quite a common pattern that we see many customers using in the industry. What it really gives you is that ability to create a tamper-proof environment for all of your control as code, so that only trusted personnel such as security operations administrators are able to change, modify, update through a CI/CD pipeline. There is absolutely no manual changes or modifications in this, and all of this has been automated using pipelines as well as CloudFormation stack sets, which is the native capability to do multi-account deployments. So I'll take you through a very brief demo. And in the demo today, what we'll cover are the use of mandatory policies. So what NAB also have in place in their environment are mandatory policies that must exist with every single role that is in an account. And this helps NAB create a preventative control for the IAM roles, and they're also using config rules to provide detection, as well as using CloudWatch events and event bus to do remediation. So if a role is removed, if a policy is removed from a role, the automated remediation kicks in and attaches the mandatory policies back to the roles. So let me just jump into. So I'm logged in as an administrator, and as you can see, this is my role, and these are the mandatory policies. So there's an IAM restriction policy, which says you can't do any of these IAM actions on namespaced resources. So if you have operations or admin roles, for example, then you won't be able to operate or do any changes. And this is the second one, SysOps restriction policy, which doesn't allow any resources to be deployed outside of AP Southeast 2, so obviously a region restriction. So I'll jump into the config dashboard, and as you can see, there are lots of non-compliant resources, so this account is not doing that great, but let's go and check out the config rule. So there's a detective rule for those mandatory policies that you've just seen. So the mandatory policy names, as you can see, the HIP IAM restriction policy and the SysOps policy. And this evaluation was run earlier today, and you can see that there are lots of non-compliant resources and also lots of compliant resources. And obviously, my role is compliant. So let's check out a non-compliant resource, and we can choose any from here. So let's choose a Lambda role. So obviously, it's a service role, and we can see that they definitely don't have the mandatory policies attached, which is bad. So what I'm going to do is, say I wanted to give myself more elevated privileges, and say I choose to give myself lots of API gateway privileges. Of course, if you want Lambda to do lots of interesting things as a developer, you can allow yourself to get elevated privileges quite easily, as you can see myself doing that now. So I'll just create that, attach this policy to the role. And now I have this API Gateway full policy, and now all of a sudden I'm able to do lots of things that potentially I couldn't do before, because now I have API Gateway full access. But if I refresh, automatically, almost near real time, I've got my mandatory restriction policies attached, which will deny Lambda functions out of AP Southeast 2, as well as that Lambda making any modifications to these restriction policies or anything that's namespaced with these admin prefixes. So say now that I try and get rid of a policy, so I just deleted a policy. However, this policy is already back because it was namespaced, and this is not to be tampered with by a developer. So if I just go back to config and refresh the config rule, I should see that that Lambda role is actually compliant. So you have the mechanism actually using this to create alerts and alarms for when you notice. So as you can see, that Lambda function now, Lambda role now is compliant. So you can create alerts to ensure that if there are non-compliant resources, that you're able to go back and remediate. Or if you've done auto remediation, that you're able to get alarms that it's been remediated. I'm actually now logged in as a dev, And in a different account, I'm logged in as a dev, and I can see that I have my restriction policies in place. Now, being a developer, I'm going to try still to create something outside of AP Southeast 2. So let me just go in and create a bucket. So what I'm trying to show you here is the effectiveness of the region restriction. So say I choose to create a bucket in Singapore, and I'll just type the bucket name and create, just using default. Let me just type. Yeah, so I'll just use default configurations. Apologies, just bear with me. Unfortunately, I think we were able to not go through the whole demo. There seems to be, unfortunately, a bit of an error with the end of the demo. Let me just try to see. So I've obviously pre-recorded this for you. Let me see if I can go back. Apologies for that. So what you would have seen is the fact that the S3 bucket was not able to be deployed in any region outside of AP Southeast 2 or Sydney, because that's the region restriction that was provided on that developer. So just before I move on to the key takeaways, one thing that I would want to highlight from the demos that you just saw is using these mechanisms, you're able to put preventative, detective, and corrective controls in your environment. So in terms of the preventative, the IAM policies that are there in all of the roles. And of course, if you're trying to retrofit old accounts, you may have some non-compliant resources, as you saw previously. But essentially, any trigger that you are able to put on the IAM roles will be triggering the remediation action for you, which is to go and attach the policies on each of the roles. Alongside that, AWS config and config rules obviously provides the detection mechanisms. So using config, I was able to detect my resource going from non-compliant to compliant and vice versa. And based off of that, you are able to get insights and analysis of your resources, so you can take corrective action or even track how you are actually complying day in and day out. So just a few key takeaways. Of course, this takes time, this takes commitment, and as your organization's maturity and appetite evolves, your ability to adapt and respond will also evolve. So start slowly, obviously learning to crawl and then walk and then run. So NAB is now in a pretty good run of automating their cloud security controls. Of course, that took some time and commitment and patience, and now they're able to adapt and evolve and respond accordingly. Automation is the key. Without automation, it's very hard to scale. It's hard to know what you have deployed in what environment and get complete visibility of your configurations and configuration changes. Taking the humans out of the equation is what allows to be able to, for you to deploy your infrastructure as well as your applications and services at scale. And what enables that, of course, is automation and security automation. You have heaps of different ways of achieving the same business outcome. So you're able to build it yourself. We've got heaps of third-party solutions as well as partners that are able to assist you. So please check out the APN partner network on our website. Of course, professional services obviously are here to help as well. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. I'm going to hand over to Phil, and Phil will take you through some next steps.
All right, thanks Raisa so much for that. Always a great level of detail, and you explain it really clearly too. After I'm done in just another minute or two, we're going to open it up for questions from everybody else that's here on the webinar. The way you do this is in your GoToWebinar interface in the top right-hand corner, there's a small section called questions. Feel free to start sending us your questions right now. The questions will come through privately, and we'll read through a couple of the questions for the remainder of the time, and we're going to stay on and keep answering questions until we run out of questions to ask. What I want to do while you're sending those questions in is just go through the 3 things that we've really found have been the most effective to help customers in this journey we're all on to cloud security and maturity. You can go to the next slide, Raisa. The first step is still clearly training. Training is the most important start to make sure that everybody, whether it's cloud security engineers that are new to security or longtime InfoSec professionals that are relatively new to cloud, have the basis of knowledge and understanding that they need to understand the different security focus we have in the cloud, the different terms we use in the cloud, the different tools we have in the cloud, and the benefits of really pulling those all together, for example, like Raisa just showed. 3 things here. This journey very often starts with our free online self-service 4 hours AWS Security Fundamentals course, which I encourage everybody here to take and or push out into the rest of your organizations. It continues through our 3-day instructor-led security engineering courses that we're running across all of the capital cities in Australia and New Zealand this year, actually right now. And finishes with our recent AWS Security Certified certification, which is a great measurement for our partners and for our customers around how mature they are at cloud security and how their people are. The next slide shows the second step, which is after your people understand what to do, you need a good and structured way to be looking at the security of your workloads. There's a number of different mechanisms that you can use to do this. 2 examples here are, well, really 3 examples. One is our well-architected program. This is a free global program that we've recently scaled even more by making the tooling available to our customers via the console. Running a well-architected review of your workloads before, during, and after their migrations, including the focus on the security pillar, is a great way to assess their security. We have a custom program as well called a Cloud Governance Review in Australia that specifically looks at helping customers be ready to migrate critical and or material and regulated workloads into the cloud. And the third way that you can do these structured sort of reviews is through a process that Raisa just talked about, through continuous assurance. Finally, step 3 here is engage with us. We find still at this level of where we are as an industry, even if customers go through the training and even if customers are assessing their own workloads, they still need some help. So there's a number of different ways to get this help. Our professional services team is one example here, and we're continuing to build our security, risk, and compliance professional services team across Australia and New Zealand. We have a number of offerings that can help customers. For example, the offering that Raisa just explained. And I would never just end with our professional services partners. We also have our partners network as well, which is, as Raisa described, really behind the heart of a lot of our success that our large regulated customers have had in moving into the cloud. Okay, so remember that. Number 1 is training. Number 2 is some sort of structured assessment of your workloads. And number 3 is if you need help, reach out to us or our partners. So let's take some questions now for a little while. We've got some questions coming in, which is great, and keep them coming while we ask. Raisa, I'll ask the questions and you answer. So the first question is, I think related to what I just said. That was a great topic, but Raisa, how exactly do I get started?
Thanks for that, Phil. So getting started is a journey. So it is a very good to begin with getting endorsement from the right leadership and support from the rest of your organization, especially if you're in security, getting endorsement from your security peers, as well as sponsorship from your leadership. And then, in parallel, you can start to look at a lot of the resources that are already out there. So a lot of this actually, it's already on AWS Labs GitHub repository. There are lots of config rules out there as well that you can already get started with, as well as the rules development kit. I spoke about my webinar that I did last year on how to write compliances code and do test-driven security development. There are also lots of reInvent talks as well as blog posts, so you can get started with all of those in parallel to getting endorsement and sponsorship. And then thirdly, there are heaps of partners, third parties out there, as well as, of course, us. We're more than happy to come in and have a chat with you, or you can reach out to us whenever. And so I would say those are the next steps.
Okay, question number 2. Keep those questions coming in. We are going to stay here and answer your questions until we run out. Question number 2, Raisa. How do I get visibility of the life cycle of these controls? For example, integrating this into my existing SIM.
So config as the service integrates quite well into Splunk. You, of course, have the config dashboard as well. So in terms of your detective controls, you've got the config dashboard, and you're able to get an aggregated view all of your compliance and non-compliant resources on AWS config. Of course, if you are after a consolidated view of your preventative, corrective, and detective controls, you can use Splunk or Security Hub. So Security Hub is not quite here in the Sydney region yet, but essentially they're the mechanisms. Of course, you will have to build the integration, but they're the mechanisms to have that holistic view of the life cycle of a control in your environment.
Okay, a quick question that I'll answer for everybody is, will you be sharing the recorded webinar with us? Answer is yes. After this session is done, we're going to email all the attendees with a few pieces of information, including a link to the recorded session entirely, so you can refer to it later or share it with your colleagues. And we are also going to be sending a list of convenient resources, which is a good way to follow up. Okay, another technical question, Raisa. While SSM reports to the local account, is there a way to push or pull all of the SSM reports from a centrally managed account?
So can I ask actually a question in return, and please feel free to type it. AWS config has recently released a remediation capability, so you're able to do inline remediation, and that's obviously based off of SSM documents as well. Is your question related to that, or just in general?
So you can send in a clarification if you want. I'll read it again just in case. While SSM reports to the local account, is there a way to push or pull all the SSM reports from a centrally managed account? If you ask that question, you want to clarify, just send us in. Somebody else had a question as well. Can you tell me more about the cloud governance process? Yeah, sure, just briefly. So well architected is for workloads. It's a structured way that customers can follow our best practices and ask questions of their workload to make sure that it's cost optimized, that it's resilient, that it's secure, etc. What the cloud governance process does is actually focus not on the workload, but on the organization itself. So we ask questions around contract management, we ask questions around risk management, we ask questions around board visibility, regulatory frameworks, etc. And we find the process of asking those questions and answering those questions helps large organizations, especially regulated organizations, understand how ready they are to move a highly regulated, or here in Australia, a material workload into the cloud. So if anybody's interested in a cloud governance assessment, reach out to us. That's not a public offering yet. It is free. We're happy to do that with anybody in Australia and New Zealand, but you do have to reach out to us to start that process, or just drop a comment and we'll get back to you. Raisa, no clarification on the SSM reports. Do you want to talk about it more generally?
For sure, happy to talk about it generally. So of the results that you get back, you are able to pull in an aggregated view. However, it is a setup that you will have to do yourself manually. So using IAM permissions and policies to create trusts across accounts, you're able to bring the results into a centralized environment. It's not at this point in general. It's not necessarily natively available. However, if you are referring to the remediation capability from AWS config and config rules, that's something that is not available yet, but is in the process of becoming available using the aggregator that AWS config provides. So you are able to see the aggregated view of all of your resource compliance and non-compliance levels, as well as any remediation that's been done. And of course, that remediation is based off of SSM documents.
Okay, great. Last chance for questions. And while we're waiting for those, this is one of the different ways that we engage with our customers and the general security and cloud security audience around Australia and globally. Please give us feedback on this format. There'll be a Q&A survey at the very end, so stay on for that, and or it'll be sent out via email. Just a reminder about our upcoming events. I think the next biggest and I think best event is our AWS Summit series for 2019. We run these in Sydney. This year, the AWS Summit is on the 1st and 2nd of May, so a little less than a month to go. We have 10 different talks focusing on cloud security at the summit this year, as we always do, with different customers up on stage with us talking about different parts of the security lifecycle. So whether you're interested in how to migrate a system of record to the cloud, whether you want to understand what our protected certification does and how you can make use of it, whether you want to take a deeper dive into automatic security remediation or look at the best practices around automated security incident response, come to Summit and hear from us live. If you can't make it to Summit, as always, it's always recorded, put up online, and you can access it for free from any place in the world. No other questions, so I just wanted to thank everybody very much. Thank our presenter today, Raisa. Awesome job, Raisa. Thanks for your insights around continuous assurance based on your practical experience doing this for a number of customers, including National Australia Bank. Thanks all very much, and you'll see the survey in a moment. Your feedback's always important to us. Thank you, and thank you for helping us help everybody stay safe in the cloud. Bye.